So welcome everyone. This is KOW Building Consultants. I'm Ken Willey. I'm here actually in our Smithtown office. We're officially closed. We have one person that comes in each day just to kind of grab the phone, get mail, pay bills, that sort of thing. So this is week 2 in our 8-week series. It is going to be a educational webinar series. Each session is an hour or less, where we're just going to try to bring some things to you that we're seeing from the field and some things that will help understand a little bit about what our role is as the construction or the bank consultant. Additionally, what I'll do is none of the webinars are going to be specifically about COVID-19, but they're all going to talk about it in parts as applicable. So you can keep an eye on that sort of thing. I'm encouraging you to go ahead and enter in the chat if you have any questions, or if there's anything people would like clarification for, etc. If I get time for them, great. If I don't, I will certainly try to do that at the end. And then lastly, this will be recorded. It is being recorded, and it'll be put up on our YouTube channel after this and shared for anyone to view. So I am going to go ahead and mute everyone, and I'm going to go ahead and dive into the webinar. So that's me, KOW Building Consultants, based here in New York. We have a presence of inspectors, all sorts of different trainings, etc., for different hard money lenders, tax credit syndicators, borrowers, etc. Mostly Eastern Seaboard, with some work now out west with a Denver office. Anyone who has any issues, questions, or comments, if you're interested, KOW Building Consultants, you could Google it, reach out to us if there's anything we can help you with. Don't hesitate to let us know. So today's webinar, I've done this one many times, but I completely rewrote it yesterday because I just felt like it needed a facelift. So I'm hoping it's a little more topical. It is a webinar or a seminar that came out of a client asking us to do this years ago. I wrote it, I own it, I do it, and it was just to get in front of an audience that said, can you help us explain or understand a little bit about the requisition process as the bank requisition KOW is concerned? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I always like to start with saying kind of what is the answer that I'm going to present, and what question prompted it. So the way I like to view today's webinar is as follows. You have a new employee perhaps, because they're easiest to kind of understand, and they say, hey, I'm holding here a site observation report, a requisition inspection report. What is this? How does it get put together? What are these different terms? How do I use this? That's the goal of today's webinar. I'm not going to teach you how to do a construction inspection. I'm going to teach you how to use a construction inspection report. So first of all, from our perspective, and all of our perspectives, on the construction loan monitoring side of things, and again, we're monitoring the construction loan. What is the goal? Well, there's a few goals. Bottom line, always, from the moment that shovel hits the ground until ribbon cutting, the bottom line is, if the borrower or GC defaults, can the bank or whatever entities take over complete the project with the remaining funds and documents? That's really what the bottom line is. You know, we're going to be hearing and seeing a lot about this in the coming months with COVID-19, about different aspects of the financial world and banking on different types of loans. You know, historically, construction loans are very risky. I don't have to tell a lot of you all that. You know, in what other, you know, you lend me money to buy a car, a house, or something like that, I can show you an asset. There's something you can repossess. In what other world do you show someone a hole in the ground and say, loan me $50 million and trust me? It's a very risky endeavor. And I know I don't need to tell everyone to call that. So the bottom line to the entire process is, if we've all done our job right, any one of the players could be replaced and the process and project would continue. So in the most easy terms to look at this is the contractor's replaced, because they're really holding the most cards once the construction starts. So everything we look at is, if there's a default, if there's a catastrophic situation, even if the contractor wins lotto and moves to the Cayman Islands, can someone else come in and finish this with the documents and details, permits, and budget remaining to finish the project? We do this by trying to reduce the risk and protect our client. Everything's about risk. So we're there, we're monitoring the asset and liability. We're reducing the risk. Turn on my mic here. And we want to make you money. We want this to go how it's underwritten to go. We want the project to be completed in the way and manner in which we all think it's going to be completed. What's the most important value in the entire report, in the entire rule from construction day 1 to construction day N? And that is remaining funds. We always need to know that we're covered tomorrow. Yesterday's okay, today's important, tomorrow's everything. Now, obviously with COVID-19, this has been, needless to say, a bit of a curveball. I'm going to get into some details as we go, but we're starting to get a lot of questions, and we're hopefully coming up with some answers on, hey, what is this going to do to my timing, my budget, my contracts, etc. So I'm going to dive into some of those as we move on. So just kind of 30,000-foot view. We go typically monthly to do the requisition inspection. Our goal is to attend the owner, architect, contractor meeting, if there is one. There not always is one, and sometimes it doesn't line up with the requisition. They might have an OAC meeting the first Tuesday of the month, but the requisition is through the 15th. So typically our client would say, yeah, go with the requisition and then just review the meeting minutes from the OAC. But the OAC, owner, architect, contractor meeting, is a good meeting to go to. By default, we like to attend those. Sometimes projects will say we're not invited. That gets a little contentious. We'll come back to our client, and what will usually work out is we are invited, but we'll stay for the first part to review the construction aspect, and then when that's done, they'll have a second meeting to go over some owner pieces, which might be design, detail related, etc. Some projects don't have OAC meetings. Some have it every week. Some it's twice a month. Some it's once a month. Some the architect doesn't come. It all varies. But by default, if we can put as many people that are stakeholders in this together to walk and meet, we want to, because we want to see what the go-between is between document exchange, details, issues, etc. Another comment, just again, we're at the 30,000-foot view, then we're going to dive into the report. We are responsible for our PPE. Our inspectors are responsible for proper footwear, proper pant, some sort of shirt identifying them, KOW, reflective vest, hard hat. Now, of course, gloves, mask. We're responsible for our own PPE. That's obviously something that's very important right now. In New York City, the projects that are able to work, which you could easily Google and find the map that's put together, if you're affordable housing or emergency projects, you're allowed to work with a certificate of authorization, which are all expiring on 6/7, by the way. So let's make sure we get those renewed. There are procedures in place regarding PPE, personal protective equipment. That term, until very recently, everyone would always think of OSHA. It's what I thought of. Because every time you go to an OSHA training, an OSHA 10, an OSHA 30, etc., you're always taught about PPE, personal protective equipment. Because as you can imagine, that will vary. A welder is going to have different PPE than that someone that's sanding and getting ready, tape and spackle for painting. The point is that PPE, we are responsible for that. And that's something that we take very seriously, of course, now, and projects do as well. But it's a key component. What if we see people without PPE? We mention it to the super or whoever we're with, but I'm going to get into kind of our issue list in a few slides. Typically, we walk first, then we meet second. Doesn't have to be that way. Personally, and most of our inspectors like to do the inspection first. Let's kick the tires, then let's meet. How does that work today with COVID? Some projects, they don't want us walking because they're limiting their traffic. We're doing video walkthroughs if it's approved by the bank, and then it's a call, not a meeting. There's other projects. I have one tomorrow in particular. I'm going to do my inspection first thing in the morning. I'll be off site before any subs are there, and then we're going to do a phone call later in the day instead of a meet and greet and cover the requisition and all other construction issues. We always try to schedule the next inspection at the conclusion of our meeting. That way we could put on the cover of the report when the next inspection is, again, pre-COVID. So our client could say, oh, it's on the 18th next month. I think I'm going to attend that. So when we have these meetings, we go over and discuss these projects, whether it's phone call, whether it's emails, whether it's in person, you know, we're trying to read body language, communication, etc. You know, it's not just the data, it's trying to get a read on how the project's going. They don't all give you tells, but some do. You know, we had a project a number of years ago that we had no idea how bad it was between the contractor and the architect because they were very polite to each other. And then in one particular week, I went and I did my inspection. Architect didn't attend. I called and I said, "Oh, why weren't you there? Did you have a conflict? You know, we could have rescheduled." And he just went on and on about the contractor and he's a crook and I'm not working with him again. So there's not always those tells, but we look for them. And if, you know, another common one is if the contractor's constantly leaning on the architect and saying, "Hey, you owe me this shop, you owe me this submittal, you owe me this document reviewed and approved," we want to make sure the architect's not spread too thin. We want to make sure that they've got the right labor hours apportioned to keep the project moving. One thing that I will mention, and sometimes I don't think this is remembered, is, you know, we're only there for a few hours each month in our typical role, and a lot happens between site visits. A perfect example would be I do an inspection, again, COVID-19 aside, on June 1st. I go up on the 4th floor. They're just finishing their framing. I go back on July 1st, sheetrock's installed. I never saw any plumbing in those walls. I never saw rough electric, mechanical, low voltage, you name it. I never saw any of it. Do I have them open up the walls? No, that's not our role. Our role is there as a monitoring monthly process, and therefore what I do is I lean on the contractor and architect and borrower and say, "Tell me about controlled inspections, who's approved what, in which areas, what can I see as a paper trail to give me that comfort level?" Because if you think I approve anything, we don't. That's not our role. We're there as a monitor. Now, the nice thing is if I go back July 1st and they're just getting ready to install the sheetrock, that's a great idea because then I could see everything, plus they'd make nice progress. But it's not always the case. So we interact with all parties, contractor, architect, GC, but we generally direct things to the architect when it has to do with a design, code, quality, waterproofing, otherwise issue, and the developer if it has to do with a quality or if something's acceptable or if they're aware of something, and then they'll direct the general contractor. Remember, it's a site observation, not an inspection. What's the difference? Well, let's use that 4th floor concept I just gave. Let's say that's in an area outside New York City where, because New York City is a little different, where at that 4th floor rough work completion, you need to close up your walls. You're going to call the building department and the building inspector, and you're going to say, "Hey, I'm ready for you to come look at my 4th floor rough work." They're going to come out. Let's just say they approve it for argument's sake. They say, "I like the fire stopping and I like the plumbing and the framing and everything else." They give you something in writing. Go ahead, you can close up the wall. You could have sheetrockers right behind them. And the moment they give you the thumbs up, they're putting the sheetrock up. That's an inspection. And you know it is because it brings you from one phase of the project, walls not closed up, to another, walls closed up. What we do is we do a site observation. A site observation being typically monthly, typically the same day or week every month, and we view as a snapshot where the project is. So that's the difference between an observation and an inspection. So the main thing always comes up, what if there is an issue? What if we see an issue? There are levels to this. The first and most readily achievable solution is we discuss the issue and it's solved right there. Hey, that waterproofing's not overlapped properly. Can we all comment on this? Oh, yeah, he's going to come back and put another layer on with a counterflash. Okay, discussed, solved. Let's say that doesn't happen, or let's say we don't know if it happened. We'll mention in our report. Let's say it gets ignored, neglected, or we feel it's even more important than that, it gets an additional email to our client. Let's say we don't feel that's enough. That's not enough of an attention. We'll call the client. We'll call you and say, hey, can we talk about X, Y, and Z? If we don't feel that's enough, we'll get on a call with everyone. And that's the final call to say, we have a major concern about X, Y, or Z. And then our nuclear option, recommend no funding. I think in the last 20 years, we've done that on one report. And when I had an inspector come to us, a very good inspector, she's very qualified, and she said, I can't get anyone to listen to me. I've got code concerns, I've got quality concerns, the architect is not speaking up on this project, no one's listening to me. And the bank just does not take anything I'm saying seriously. They're just, I don't know what else to do. And there were some serious code issues. We recommended no funding. And boy, did that get the attention of everyone. That's our nuclear option. So that's kind of the levels of issue. We'd love it to be handled in step one. That's great. That's what we want. The most important thing we want is this project to move on to the next month, get a month closer to completion. Because every more month that this project is completed and funded, it's 1 month less liability, 1 month more asset toward that end goal. And I'll say to our inspectors all the time, you serve two roles out in the field. One, you're policing the contractor. And two, you're helping get the contractor as much money as they're due to pay the subs. Because money makes the project go. And the best thing in the world for us is the plumber to walk out on a Friday afternoon and say, I'll see you Monday. The worst thing in the world for us is that plumber, let's say they're being nickel and dimed by whomever, to walk out on Friday and say, well, enough with you. I'm going across town to a project where I know I'm going to get paid. Because demobilization and then remobilization is not fun. It's money and it's time. So that's kind of the dual hat we play. Policing the project and helping get as much money as due to the sub so they come back, pay their bills, pay their suppliers, and we can work again tomorrow. So quickly what our report includes, summary page. So what I like to say to our inspectors and our clients is 30 seconds versus 30 minutes. If you have 30 minutes, I strongly encourage you to dive into the report. Look at the details, see what's happening with the schedule, permits, code, whatever it might be. 30 minutes, dive into the report. If you don't, or if you do later, but initially you just want a quick snapshot, 30 seconds is all you need for the cover page. It's the most important stuff from the report pasted to give you that 30-second snapshot. Critical issues are also included on the summary page. Now this is for the KOW format. Some clients have their own format, which don't look like this, but we serve in the same sort of way. The summary and the critical issues, and then get into detail later on in the report. Our report used to be a narrative style. That's been replaced with a tabular format, like you see here. This is just the more of the way the world is today, which is fine. I feel like you can have the best of both worlds. You can have a tabular format, which if your questions are good questions, and your answers could be clear answers, do just as well as a narrative. You know, we've had reports where it used to be paragraphs, where it'd say, sheetrock is up to the 3rd floor, sheetrock's ongoing 4th floor, sheetrock's now finished at the 4th floor, sheetrock's, and all you had to say is sheetrock is done up to the 9th floor. So let's just say that. Now, if you want history, go back in the last 10 months of reports. But we're trying to make it as user-friendly as possible without giving up that detail. We put in the site visit, weather, and conditions. It's good to know. 5 degrees, hey, why aren't they doing concrete? I think I know why. 100 degrees, why aren't there workers out on the roof? This can explain it. It's raining, it's windy. You know, New York City DOB has a sign up you can do which it gives you weather advisories. It'll send you a text, it'll send you an email and say, hey, you can't do this, this, and this because of the winds. This is good to know. So the weather conditions are good to note so we can look back and say, oh, I think I know why they weren't doing that day, or why they were. You know, most winters in New York City, you lose 5 days over the winter due to weather. That's the average, 5. This past winter, 1.5 or 2 days. A lot milder over winter. We didn't have snow. And every winter in New York City in particular, and certainly up in Buffalo and Albany and north of here, we look at three things in the winter, three key things. One is temperature, and that has its own challenges. One is precipitation, usually snow, and the other is wind. So those three things can dictate what trades can work that day. You know, rain, we don't like to work in the rain, but the nice thing the rain is that it drains away. If you get 2 feet of snow and that's not going to melt for a while, you're going to have a lot of work that's going to pretty much come to a standstill. So those are the three things we look for. We include our funding recommendation on usually page 2. Again, it depends on format, but it's up front. On this one's on page 1 rather, but then we have a summary down below. But you notice one of the few things, I know you can't see the detail, but the green row there is funding recommendation. We have a section later on in the report about change orders, potential change orders and contingency. We talk about retainage and stored materials. We talk about who attended the meeting. We have a body with completed work by trade. We have issues, defects, and permits. We talk about the schedule, delays and potential delays, and we have an appendix. So that's the 30,000-foot view of our report. Now I want to go into a little bit of detail on some of the more important or pressing items. So first and foremost, of course, is now someone just sent a question. Thank you. Do you typically request PCOs through completion? Now, by PCO, do you mean a potential or pending change order? I'm assuming yes, and the answer is yes. Yes, we do. Another question, that brings up another question. What is completion? Depends. By default, we consider completion when our role is done representing the bank loan, which is typically the temporary certificate of occupancy. So let's take New York City, because it's known to a lot of us, or most of us, and it's fairly well defined, although messy. Sometimes we'll have people say, well, they have the TCO, so they're done. Not so fast, my friend, as Lee Corso would say. TCO and complete are two different things. You could have a TCO in a building and you still have plywood up in your elevator cab. You don't have your finished flooring down in your lobby. You have a fire-rated wall built in your lobby because you didn't complete a certain community room or something like that. You have Home Depot light fixtures instead of your permanent light fixtures. You have a typical 90-minute storefront door instead of your custom storefront, which hasn't gotten to the States yet. You're not complete, but you're TCO. So our general role is to completion. To completion. This building is ready to have the keys turned over. Now, with that said, very often we could have a project that gets a TCO. And I mean, this has happened numerous times. I'll do an inspection on a Monday. On a Wednesday, I'm still waiting the requisition to issue the report. I get a call from the bank that says, oh, they got the TCO, we're taking out. You're good. We don't need your report. So from our completion, TCO is the finish line, but we're not done with the project. And that's kind of how the two things are different. So when we talk about the application for payment, which is really the most key item in this entire process, the most common is the AIA G702, G703. I know a lot of you know lots and lots and lots about this, but simply put, the G703 is all the detail. The G702 is the summary and the signature page. It summarizes the totals, retainage, previously funded, amount due, etc. It should be signed by the contractor and the architect with perhaps a separate owner or borrower approval. The other piece that's good to note is the architect signing the G702 is not just stating that the work is complete, but if you read the fine print, and people sometimes change the fine print when they make it on their own Excel, but the fine print says it's not only complete, but it's in compliance with code and plans and specs. So it's a powerful signature when the architect approves of that funding request. On the application for payment, most items can draw down or request what's in place or be completed by the day's end. Some banks say if it's going to be in the next 30 days, it's okay. Some want us to see it in place. Now, what about, day's end? How can that vary? Well, that could be a little tricky. If I'm up on the 4th floor, I don't know why I'm using 4th floor, but I'm on the 4th floor and they're sheetrocking and they've got 4 sheetrockers and they're banging along and they've got you know, 30 lineal feet to go, and it's 10 a.m., and they'll say, we're going to be done by the end of the day, that's going to probably appear reasonable to me. Materials here, workers are here, no reason why they won't be done today. But if they say, oh, we'd like the 5th floor also, not so fast. So in cases where people are forecasting, which we do not recommend on requisitions, we'll typically recommend one of a few things up to our client, the bank. So let's say, for argument's sake, and I'm just going to use an extreme example, sheetrocker's done to the 4th floor, they want the next 2 floors, which are going to take them 2 weeks, but by the time all the paperwork comes in and state approval, there's another 2 weeks of time. One of number of things. The answer could be no, you get just what you've asked for, and that we've seen today. Number 2, yes, you can have those additional 2 weeks of work because we want to keep you working and we understand the paperwork takes some time. Number 3, you can get that additional work, but we'll be back. Or number 4, you can get that additional work, but we need to see photo evidence from you that the work is completed. And the answer of which of those 4 are allowed is a discussion we'll have. We'll talk about the risk. We'll talk about the comfort level. What about if it's a project where I'm there on a Tuesday, block work's done, and they're ready to drop the plank for the 3rd floor? It's coming tomorrow. They got 47 flatbeds lined up, 8 slabs of bed coming tomorrow morning. They'll be here at 5 a.m. Okay? What if it's later that day? What if I'm there early in the morning and they're going to start at noon and work until 8 p.m.? Let's say they have some sort of exception. In other words, day's end, but a big ticket item. That's going to be a discussion that we have. We would rather get them paid if the work is done and keep the project moving, but that's going to be a discussion we'll have. Is it common to see G7023 signed about a month prior to the issuance of an SOR? Good question. So the general process is we're requested to do our inspection, and let's assume it's not pre-scheduled a month out, or it's not a project that says, because we look at every project as one of 3 categories. Category A, which is our favorite, says, hey, we're going to have the requisition the first Tuesday at 10 a.m. Great. Lock it in your schedule for the next year. First Tuesday at 10. If you give me that much runway, I guarantee I'll be here. That's easy, because I'll schedule around you. Second scenario is they don't plan out the next year or whatever, but they'll say, hey, when we finish each inspection, we'll schedule the next inspection. Okay, that's good. I like that. It gives us 4 weeks to look ahead and say, does everyone agree on Tuesday the 18th at 1? Yes, okay, sounds good. So we can give some input, but if you schedule us a month out, usually you have pretty good success. And then the third scenario is the hair on fire. The contractor emails, hey, when can you come out? Smaller project, doesn't have a formal meeting. Well, if you ask me when can I come out, we're going to control that schedule a bit more. We're pretty much going to tell you, hey, how's Thursday morning? They'll say, yeah, that's good, and we're going to come out. So it's one of those 3. But once the inspection occurs, we go back to our office, and we're on the clock as far as we have to prepare our report, photos, put our numbers in Excel, whatever else we need to do. But we cannot issue that report until we have what we need to issue that report, which is typically a fully signed requisition package, any applicable change orders, partial waiver of lien, permits or schedule updates or whatever else might be applicable. So we can do the best job we can do, but we're absolutely not able to issue that until we get all those documents. Some projects, we leave the meeting with the documents. Well, now we're really on the clock. Some projects, they email it to us 2 days later, okay? Some projects, it takes 5 weeks. Some projects, I'm ready to do requisition 7 inspection, and you still haven't gotten me requisition 6 package, GC. So even though I hate that it looks like it took us a month to issue a report, it actually may have taken us a day, because we're literally waiting for that full requisition package. We really don't like 7 to be backed up because of 6. So we're going to push back and say, hey, how can we work on this process a little? A week, maybe 2, okay, but it starts to backlog. So that's really what dictates when our report goes out, when we have all those documents. So the goal on the requisition is to hold the contractor accountable, but to also keep the cash flowing, like I talked about a little earlier. One other comment, some projects have an owner's equity, so the owner's paying directly. Our default recommendation is the owner's equity should be paid in the first phase of the project, then the bank funding comes in. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it's a percentage, sometimes it's a percentage of the first certain amount. It all varies. In a weird way, it doesn't really impact how we do our inspection and report. We had a project a number of years ago in the EB5 program. Some of you may be familiar with that. And I remember the developer asking me, do you have a problem that the funds come from the EB5 funds? And I said, we don't care if the funds come from someone on the moon. For us, the concrete installed properly or not, or the sheetrock, or the windows, or the boiler, or the roofing are irrelevant to the funding source. We're going to answer our questions without noting where the funding is coming from. Now, obviously, it's an important consideration of how our report is structured, addressed, etc. But to do our inspection, it's all on us. Once we're in the field, that's on us. That's our job. Where the money comes from, that's another question to ask tomorrow when we're in the office. But the field aspect and the reporting of what's done and issues, etc., is not even linked at all to where the source of funds are. Typically, the contractor sets percentages, and the architect, or maybe the owner, signs an agreement. We're there as the bank representative in a monitoring role, and we do not sign the application for payment. There's no place for us to sign that as the AIA designed it, and our report is essentially our signature as far as our recommendation and approval. Some items are pari passu or equal footing, so they draw down in line with overall completion, like general conditions, overhead, profit. Some items might draw down all on Rec 1, bond, insurance, permits. That's okay, we'll have a discussion, but it's a reasonable industry standard request. And then our report includes a requested column, G702, and our recommendation column. And the interesting thing is, even though our report is very tabular, and I've noticed a lot of our competitors' reports pretty tabular as well, what's interesting is if you actually look at the root of all of our reports, they go back to a manufacturer's Hanover 1974, I think it was, I could be wrong, issued memo to say, hey, this is what a construction consultant's inspection report should look like. And it was issued, circulated, and still to this day, a lot of the reports sort of follow some of the same ideas and layout, including those two columns. So that 1970s produced template is still very much alive today in one way. So a question just came in. Can our report be shared with borrowers? Excellent question. The answer is 100% if our client approves. We do not have any issue with the borrower seeing our report if our client approves. And everything is, we're going to ask our client. You need to email me that. I'll find out if that's approved. Because we need to know that that's an approved thing before we would ever make that decision. We certainly don't put language or comments in the report that the borrower is going to be offended with or something like that. It's professionally written. And pretty much everything should have come from the meeting in the field anyway. You know, like I'll sometimes joke with contractors, if we're disagreeing on a number, I say, look, I'm not coming up with a number for your masonry work completed at all. I'm just representing what's actually done, which they don't understand is actually a joke. But the point is, if it's discussed in the meeting and it's fully disclosed, it's in the report, there shouldn't be any surprises. How about contingency and change orders? Well, typically, hard cost contingency, 5% or 10%. Our recommendation is 10%. On new construction, some banks go 5%. On rehabs or renos, 10%. I definitely like 10% for renovations for two big reasons. Number one, you're working a percentage off a smaller contract value. And number two, there's more that you're not replacing behind the walls and ceilings on a reno that could be surprises. But on your big, nasty ground up projects, there's a lot you can unearth. We've seen them hit oil tanks, buried safes, buried boilers, you name it. Dewatering, rock we didn't know was there, and everything under the sun. So a typical 10% is really a good percentage. Is 5% better for new than 10% for reno? Probably, but most go 10%. And ideally, it's for unforeseen conditions. Ideally, you have that ground up project, between 40 and 60% of your change orders are going to be before you even finish your foundation. Change orders should be fully signed by owner, architect, contractor. You don't have to use the AIA form, but it's the most common format and what we recommend. And it has 3 signature lines at the bottom: owner, architect, contractor. So what do? We look at them and have a discussion. Are they reasonable? Are they adequate? Are they warranted? So the question of, do we approve change orders? No, but you better involve us, because if we don't get to a comfort level that it was warranted and the costs are borne out as reasonable and it's adequate, you're going to have a problem getting funded for that. And most of the time, that works to get us part of the conversation, so we at least don't have any surprises. We discuss potential change orders. And by the way, this is something we were talking about earlier today on a project. There's potential and there's pending. What's the difference? A pending change order is coming. Potential change order may not be. So pending is, hey, we just talked to the electric company. We have to move the point of entry for our electric service. Our electrician said it's probably a $50,000 change order. That's a pending change order. Expected. It's coming. It's a matter of when. A potential change order is, hey, we just got off the phone with the electric company. They may move our point of service entry. We don't know. It may be a 50, 100,000. We're not really sure. We'll let you know when we know. That's a potential change order. We hope it's not, but we want to talk about this stuff as early as possible. And we'll say to a contractor, hey, what do you see as a price for that? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Well, can you give me a range? I don't know, between 100 and 200,000. Okay. Not very accurate, but it's better than nothing. Let's start a conversation now so there's no surprises down the road. How about GC error? How about designer error? Are those change orders? Yes, they are. Sometimes these things have to get fought at the end as far as a liquidated damages or an errors and omissions insurance. But GC error and design error can be change orders. Now, the design error, we'll typically see that worked in an errors and omissions insurance claim toward the end. The GC error, it's going to be probably some sort of negotiation against retainage toward the end of the project. There could also be a soft cost contingency, legal, accounting, us, permits, and also a separate developer's contingency. So, I'm trying to give as much education as possible, but of course, everyone should understand not all these things are going to apply perfectly. Either small, 3-story, ground up, row style, rural project, and you have your nasty 23-story, 3 sub-level Bronx schist removal Bronx project, they're going to be very different dynamics. So on your larger projects, you'll have a separate developer's contingency, which we'll track. And we'll say what's being drawn against that, what's there as available funds. And again, that contingency, it's an emergency fund. It's unforeseen conditions. You have a GMP, you have a stipulated sum. What's the difference? Well, your stipulated sum is, here's the price. Let's say I'm a contractor and I'm going to build this building for 50 million. There's your price. There's your price. If I build it for 48 million, you're still paying me 50. If I screw up a little and I build it for 53 million, you're still paying me 50. You know the ceiling. But because I've guaranteed a price, you're going to pay me no more, no less. My book is typically closed. You don't get to see my subcontracts. You don't get to see my subs pricing. All you know is I'm on the hook for 50 million. However, if I hit an oil tank and no one told me there was an oil tank, and a geotechnical didn't tell me it was an oil tank, and civil didn't tell me it was an oil tank, and there's no record of an oil tank, and I got to remove it, and it costs $50,000, that's a change order. That's above and beyond the stip sum, because it's not a piece of scope work included in the 50 million. I'm not talking about if I come back to you and go, I screwed up, I measured wrong. There's more windows than I thought. Tough. I'm talking about an out of scope item, like hitting an oil tank. That's a change order above and beyond the 50 million. Whereas a GMP would be 50 million is the price. If it comes in over 50 million, it's still 50 million. That's your ceiling. But if it comes in under 50 million, the owner and contractor share the spoils in some pre-designated percentage split. And in that case, it's an open book. It's an open book. Now, this starts to get a little gray when we start to talk about CM jobs. So you have a CM job could be a little different where it might go over. I'm not going to get into kind of different contracts right now. All I'll say is we want to know from a contract standpoint, what is the contingency, what is it going to be used for, and how are we going to track it? So what is the lien risk from subcontractor with sum versus GMP? So the interesting thing is I am not a lawyer. I'm a civil engineer. That's what I have my PE in. But from everything I've seen and learned and heard, if you have a stiff sum and you have that partial waiver of lien that the contractor gives you with a conditional and an unconditional number, unconditional saying, hey, I'm the GC, I've paid 10 million before today, I've paid my subs and suppliers. And a conditional, meaning if I get this $1 million this month, I'm going to take care of or have taken care of my subs and suppliers. That is all you need from a lien coverage standpoint. All those other sub-lien waivers are not any more powerful than that GC's partial waiver of lien. Now, with that said, when we get them, it's still good to get them, in my opinion, because we could still see a paper trail of the fire sprinkler sub and the elevator sub, etc. So it's still a good thing to get. But from what I've heard, and again, I'm not an attorney, the partial waiver of lien from the GC covers everything downstream. Now, as far as the contingency is concerned, it's not a guarantee to the GC. They don't automatically get it. They don't always get it. It's just in case of unforeseen conditions. Majority is for foundation issues. And later in the project, it can be used for upgrades. So everything goes well. They say, hey, listen, we want to do a nicer flooring in the lobby. Good. We're 75% complete. Everything's going well. Good discussion to have. What about value engineering? So value engineering is something that comes into play. And what we're trying to do is engineer value into the project. So what you're doing is you're usually doing a swap of A for B. I'd say just be careful that you're not giving up quality. You might have someone say, hey, good news, value engineering change order, we're going to save $200,000. How? Well, at the elevator waiting areas, instead of ceramic tile, we're going to put vinyl. Well, it's not as good. It lasts half as long. So you could save the money all you want, but don't sell it to me as the same thing. It's not the same thing. So I would just caution value engineering on the surface, good. Just make sure that you're not giving up value inherently or even explicitly. So retainage is a holdback applied to the monthly application for payment. It's used for protection for the owner against work defects, punch list issues. Usually 10%, but it could vary. Maybe at 50%, it gets reduced to 5%, then might vary to the certificate of occupancy. Sometimes we'll see deposits not have retainage held. We're not a big fan of that. I understand they have to pay the deposit, but that can get a little bit messy in tracking that. And some other things that don't have retainage, bond, insurance premiums, I understand that as well. Very often there'll be no retainage, drawn at Rec 1, and you move on. We will track the reductions and releases of the retainage. A reduction would be, hey, this sub now has a 5%, not 10%. A release would be, hey, this sub's now done, we're giving them all their money. We can get a final waiver of lien from the sub, and we recommend that the retainage not be fully released until the sub has complied with everything in their contract. Completed work, final waiver of lien, warranty, guarantee, plus one more month just to make sure everything's good. So if your concrete sub has been off-site several months, all the work's done, all the test reports are passed, warranties, guarantees, spec books, everything is completely done, to release retainage to them is a reasonable request. However, let's keep in mind that the GC is still on the hook. Just because the GC chose to release that retainage to the contractor, it's still the GC that's on the hook for that work. And we will give you our opinion as far as what we see as reasonable. We will give you our opinion, what we're seeing in the industry. But this is a risk question, ultimately, and a question of contract. Non-work in place request is something that comes up on most jobs. So pretty simply, you can put everything that's on the G7023 into two categories. Work in place, that's on us. Work in place is installed, poured, painted, windows, roof, boiler, piping, insulation, on us. It's our inspector's job to say good, bad, or indifferent for work in place, black and white. Non-work in place is a risk question. Permits, mobilization, off-site deposits, on-site deposits, engineering, coordination. That's a discussion we'll have with you. You want $50,000 to get your HVAC sub? We'll let you know. We'll give a call to you. You might say to us, hey, what's reasonable? We'll say, oh, that's a pretty reasonable request in today's market. But it's a question for you. Now, you might give us pre-authorization. Hey, for every sub, they can get X number of percentage, 5%, 10% for some, in submittals, engineering, and shops. Okay, you've just pre-answered that question for us. But non-work in place is a risk question we'll have with you. 50,000 to the Windows sub, okay. 2 million to the Windows sub, that's a different story. Let's discuss that. If it's not bolted down or installed on site, it's a risk question we'll have. And there's different risks. On-site stored risk has questions of theft, damage, exposure, etc. Off-site stored risk, which we can visit, is better in a way because it can be locked in a warehouse with lighting and humidity controlled and temperature and all the rest. So that insurance we get on that off-site stored is a great value. The only pickle you could have there is if you had a tax lien on that warehouse itself, we'd have trouble getting it out. I'm going to keep going without the questions right now. I'll do them certainly at the end. I just want to get through everything. But thank you for the questions. One thing we're seeing with COVID today, a lot of two things. One, we want to lock in pricing, so we want to give them a deposit. And two, we're looking to get early monies to get materials secured and issued here, shipped here, particularly from overseas. We're seeing that increase in the deposit and the non-work to lock in pricing and get materials due to the uncertainty of the market with COVID-19. So keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on that. When it comes to trade work in our report, we're going to talk about completed work with an emphasis on work this period. We'll break it by trade, plumbing, masonry, concrete. We'll talk about general conditions. You know, we start with a template, but it can be customized. You know, we might have a community building at this new residential project. We'll add a lump there for community building. That's fine. We might have one for a wastewater treatment facility. That might get its own heading. So the template is a starting point, but we'll customize it to match the project itself. We'll talk about construction defects. We'll talk about workforce and its adequacy. How's that been impacted? Considerably. I would say that if we looked at a V, if you will, or a U, first few weeks of COVID-19, you saw some less people because there were some issues with where can we work and getting subs, and maybe someone had, you know, a spouse or an elderly relative with them that was sick. You saw a drop, and then you saw a big drop. There was some fear. There was some, I'm not sure I want to come to work next week. The subs voting with their feet. So you had 10% initially, maybe 30% total, 40% total after a few weeks. We're now on the upside. We're seeing jobs add workers this week versus last week. Particularly in New York and the hot spots, we have a process in place, there's safety checks in place, and we're seeing the workforce come back. We're going to track permits. We're going to track documents that we've received and reviewed, like submittal logs, RFI logs, construction meeting minutes. It's always good to see if we weren't there, what was discussed, what's critical. We'll talk about controlled inspections. That is like that inspector coming and saying, yes, you can close up this wall. That's a controlled inspection. Outside New York City, it's done by the municipal inspector. In New York City, it's largely done by a private company. We're going to talk about violations or stop work orders. We're going to talk about utilities. That's a big one. That's a big one. You know, utilities generally come in a certain order. You know, if you're going to have water in your building, you better have sewer. So you got to have sewer before water. And if you're going to have electric or gas, you better have water to fight a fire. And if you're going to have gas, you need. So the utilities are going to follow a certain order. The stopgap is not usually the installation to that point of where the municipality takes over. It's usually the city or this township or whoever that's installing the utilities. We're seeing with COVID-19, some of the towns and cities are having trouble getting workers out because of fears going out in the field. Keep an eye on that. And then any other issues. All right, schedule. So we talk about the schedule. Now, the thing about the schedule that's interesting is it's anywhere from 1 page to a 45-page professional company prepared critical path schedule. All right, well, what we do is we alter that in how we view it based on the project. The schedule complexity has to fit the project. And 99 times out of 100 it does. But if it doesn't, we're going to speak up. We're going to say, look, you need to give a little more detail here. But one of the things we say is all right, well, let's look at milestones. Milestone completion. This is like each notch in the belt where we just start to relax a little more. Shovel hits the ground, worry level high. Foundation done, whew, that's a big sigh of relief. Foundation done is a good day. Superstructure done, feeling good. Waterproofed or weatherproofed. All right, now we got windows in, we got a skin on the building. Temp roof is done up top. Now we're feeling good. Rough framing, all right, now we're feeling great because now we've approved of our framing. We know where all the rooms and the corridors, etc. That's a great. Now we could turn the project over to the mechanical trades people because the framing's done. Okay, rough copper, rough cast iron. All right, now you're really cooking on the job. Now you got a lot of trades people on the job. You're doing a lot of work. You're advancing a lot of money because you're advancing the project quickly. Rough mechanical work done, feeling great. Closed walls and ceilings. Okay, now we're to the finish stage and then punch list. So this is kind of in our mind and how we say in the report of the milestones. They're a good way to say, let's gauge your project based on these 7 milestones. And the more further down we go in the list, the more easier we're breathing because we've got more of a project to look at and less of a liability or a hole in the ground. Critical path is the recommended schedule. I'll give you a quick summary on what a critical path schedule is if people don't know. Let's say you live in an apartment. I could be a house too, but you have a bathroom and you have a kitchen and you want to get both renovated. And let's say for argument's sake, you go with 2 different subs. Kitchens are us and baths are us. And Kitchens are us says it's going to take me a week to demo, 2 weeks to do all my work, and 3 weeks to do my finish work. So that's 6 weeks. Week, 2 weeks, 3. That's 6. Now your bathroom sub says it'll take me a week to demo and 3 weeks to do everything else. That's 4 weeks. So your kitchen's 6 weeks, your bathroom's 4 weeks. Your kitchen is your critical path. That means that nothing in your kitchen's path can be delayed without delaying your project. Your bathroom guy could say, or lady could say, hey, I can't start next week for demo. I could start the week after. Is that going to be a problem? And simply by the critical path thinking, the answer is no. Because that sub has, or that path has 2 weeks of flow. Whereas your kitchen, everything matters. That's critical path. They're both paths, but one's critical, the longer one. And the thing with critical path is we always look at it as if you have to do A to do B and then C, they're on a path. If you could do A and B together at the same time, they're on different paths. So what's the most important ground up construction critical paths? Elevator, utilities, and long lead items. Biggest one, elevator. Because if you're above 75 feet in New York City, until you get your elevator signed off for construction, you can't remove your hoist. If you can't remove your hoist, you can't finish up your hoist run facade work. Until you finish that, you can't do your hoist run interior and finish work. So your elevator is typically your critical path. When we talk about schedule, we talk about previous delays, and potential delays. We do a 30-day look ahead. Hey, where are you going to be in a month? That's a really good question to ask any contractor because any project whatsoever, they'll give you a pretty good feel where they're going to be. We'll talk about the recent progress and pace. Now, how we track most projects is, one, we track it against an S-curve. Now, an S-curve is the industry standard way to track most ground-up projects. The S meaning that the beginning parts of the project are a little slower as far as percent complete per month because you don't have much going on. You're just doing foundation. You're not really jumping the project from a dollars or requisition standpoint much every month. And then at the end, you don't have a lot of workers there. You're just doing finish work, not a lot of big jumps in dollar value completed. It's a little flatter. And everyone knows flatten the curve now from the COVID. But the middle part, that's when you're cooking. The middle part is when you could have all your trades work, rough work and sheetrock and roofing and windows. So if your beginning stage project, you have 20 workers, and your end stage project, you have 40 workers, your middle stage, you have 110. So we'll track your actual project, green, versus your S-curve, which is a typical S-curve. That's how we'll track it. So right now, if I know after month 10, I'm at 25%, and at month 9, I should have been 25%, I'm 1 month behind. This schedule right here is 1 month behind. If it hits the S-curve tracking from now on, it'll end up 1 month behind. And then the other way to look at that is, how much did they change the percentage by month? Now, this was a little bit of a different project, but what they actually did was they got a lot of concrete poured first, and then they started working, and now they're starting to pick up a little more steam. How much percentage per month? And very simply, if you look at it from a straight line standpoint, if you finish 5% a month for 20 months, you got 100%. That's straight line. So if you're using kind of averages, a 20-month project, 5% should be your average. And again, that's average. Just to finish, appendix. Photo log from us, application for payment, fully executed and notarized. Lien waivers state what's been paid and is done from Rec 2 to the completion. Any logs or minutes or reporting, if there's an updated schedule. And for all these items, we can include them or we can not include them. We're always going to review them, but whether you want them included or not from a memory and size standpoint is dictated by you. So I think I just hit about the hour. If you need to go, please drop off. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We're doing this again next Wednesday. I'll add, so it looks like I have a few questions I'm just gonna get to here. So in order that they came in, for final retainage release, do you recommend funding final retainage release and receiving the final waivers from the GC and subs? Yes. It becomes a matter of a chicken and an egg. This is a very good question. Very, very good question. So some projects we do a certificate of completion, and in that case, we want to see a final waiver of lien. Well, in order to get a final waiver of lien, we also want to see a final application for payment. Well, how do you do that? How do you say, here's my final application for payment and get paid everything when you need to give the final waiver of lien to get paid everything? I understand where that comes from. So what I'd say is a final waiver of lien can only come after they've received all monies, including all retainage. You know, another point is, are we seeing more deposit and stored requests due to COVID-19? Yes, yes we are. We're seeing more deposit and stored. It's starting to come. I will say optimistically that I've been very impressed with how a lot of our projects have reacted, subs, supers, etc. And we haven't seen big spikes in costs yet. I say yet because I can't forecast what's going to happen. But as far as change orders for force majeure, you know, this is outside of our control. I believe they're coming in different levels and complexities based on your project size, but we haven't seen that yet. But we're starting to see more deposit and stored requests because cash is going to rule uncertainty to get materials and subs on site. Do we track TCO expiration dates and new TCOs in lieu of final TCOs? So it's interesting. In New York City, the TCO, temporary certificate of occupancy, is good for 90 days by default. 90 days. So you get 3 months. And you get 4 TCOs before you got to start all over again. Now, actually, you don't have to start all over again because most of the time, and I hope there's no one on the DOB on this, it's actually the city and the DOB that's delaying that final certificate of occupancy. So we absolutely track that TCO expiration date and look to see the new one when it's issued. The good news is, in New York City, to get your TCO renewed is a pretty straightforward process. There's not really a risk to it once you've got your first TCO. You got your first TCO, getting the second one is, I don't say a matter of paperwork, but it's a matter of paperwork. And then, again, usually good projects, at least 6 months to go from TCO to final CO. Bad projects, you're talking in terms of a year plus. Is there any way to get comfort that all subs are being paid in full before releasing retainage, aside from retaining conditional, unconditional lien waivers for all subs? It's a good question. There's one additional arrow you have in your quiver, which I've wanted to work that into a seminar forever. But and that is, you can ask for a release. And a lien waiver, let's just say ABC Plumbing. I'm just making up a sub. ABC Plumbing gives you a partial waiver of lien and says, yeah, GC, I was paid $1 million up to today, and you owe me another 100 grand for this month. And that lines up with the GC's numbers. Everyone's happy. Well, all I'm doing as that sub is waiving my right to lien the job. But if I wasn't paid that $1 million, I'm coming after you, GC, and I'm going to win. We had a project a number of years ago that fell into trouble, and the subs all came up with these lien waivers. And as it turns out, none were paid hardly anything. But the GC told them, you better give me this or you're not going to be paid anything. But the thing was, if you give a lien waiver and you were not paid, you can still collect in a court of law. You will still get that money. That's a lien waiver. All you're doing is waiving your right to lien the project. However, if you give a release, that's much more powerful. So you could get a release from a sub, ABC Plumbing. I give a release for this $1 million. It's actually called like a partial waiver of lien and release of, I can't remember the legal term. And now I've actually given up my right to get that money if I wasn't paid. So you better believe the only reason I'm giving you that is if I was paid that money. And by the way, one final note I will give you, I have heard there's some issues for some projects where you have courthouses or partially or wholly shut down and are difficulty title companies doing title runs and doing a lien search on your funding to see if the title's clear and if there's any liens. So it's something to look into also. Make sure that from a courthouse standpoint, you can get a clear title for liens if you're going to do a funding. So that's it. Thank you for watching. I know I went over a little, I apologize. Thank you for the questions. Again, next Wednesday, same thing, week 3. Join if you can. If you can't, share it with a friend. And all these are going to be up on our YouTube after on demand. Thank you very much. Everyone stay safe, take care, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.